Marathon Whitlock, the austere billionaire CEO renowned for his unyielding business acumen and impeccable taste, arrived at the Palm Crest Resort after a grueling week of high-stakes meetings and relentless boardroom battles. The resort, a sprawling sanctuary of modern luxury and serene sophistication nestled along a pristine coastline, had always been his escape, a rare haven where he could momentarily shed the heavy mantle of his corporate empire. That evening, weary yet determined to savor a few precious hours of solitude, Marathon made his way through the softly lit corridors of the resort, his mind adrift in plans for quiet reflection in his private suite. Lost in his thoughts and the gentle hum of the air conditioning, he turned a corner without a second thought. The hallway was lined with plush carpeting and tasteful artwork, each piece meticulously chosen to evoke calm and refinement. As he reached for the door at the end of the corridor, his hand, guided more by habit than deliberate intention, pushed it open. Instantly, his world shuddered with unexpected shock. Instead of the familiar layout of his own suite, a room marked by minimalist elegance, dark leather furnishings, and a meticulously arranged desk, he was confronted by a vastly different space. The room he had mistakenly entered was bathed in a warm, ambient glow that softly contrasted with the cool blue hues of his own quarters. Elegant draperies framed a large, arched window overlooking a secret garden, while antique furnishings, seemingly plucked from a bygone era, added an air of romantic nostalgia. At the far end of the room, a large easel stood beside a well-worn settee. There, absorbed in her work, sat a woman whose presence seemed to command the space with an effortless grace. Her auburn hair cascaded freely over her shoulders as she delicately applied pastel hues to a canvas, her eyes intently focused on capturing a landscape that shimmered with emotion and mystery. Marathon froze at the threshold, his usual steely composure crumbling in the face of such an unexpected tableau. For a long, suspended moment, the only sound in the room was the soft scratch of the brush against the canvas and the distant murmur of a classical record playing from an old turntable. The woman looked up suddenly, startled by the unanticipated intrusion. Their eyes met, her gaze wide and inquisitive, his a mixture of shock and an unspoken plea for explanation. I'm terribly sorry," Marathon stammered, stepping back as if physically repulsed by his own mistake. His voice, usually so commanding and controlled, trembled slightly. "I thought this was my room," he struggled to find the words that might dissolve the awkward silence. The woman's expression softened, her initial alarm giving way to a gentle curiosity rather than anger. She set her paintbrush down carefully, her hand steady despite the sudden disruption. "It happens," she replied in a calm, almost melodic tone that contrasted with the tension in the air. "Please, don't worry about it." There was something in her eyes, a quiet kindness and an unexpected sparkle, that made him pause. In that brief moment, the rigid boundaries between his high-powered world and her creative refuge blurred. Marathon's mind raced. Who was this woman, and why did her presence stir something in him that he had long thought buried beneath the layers of corporate armor? The room, filled with the subtle scent of linseed oil and fresh canvas, seemed to pulse with an energy that challenged the sterile predictability of his everyday life. Every detail, the soft, flickering light of the lamp, the delicate pattern on the antique rug, even the gentle hum of the building's ventilation, wove together into a tapestry of unspoken promise. Despite his initial embarrassment, he found himself unable to turn away. Instead, he hesitated at the doorway, captivated by the sight before him. The woman's eyes, reflecting both vulnerability and strength, seemed to invite him into a space of unguarded honesty. For the first time in years, Marathon felt the distant echo of something he had almost forgotten, a longing for genuine connection, not measured in millions or power plays, but in quiet, transformative moments. After what felt like an eternity, the woman offered a small, tentative smile, a silent gesture that bridged the gap between shock and acceptance. Marathon, heart pounding, managed to nod in return. In that accidental crossing of paths, neither spoke of apologies or corrections. Instead, they shared a moment of profound silence, as if the universe had conspired to grant them a rare glimpse of what life could be outside the rigid confines of duty and expectation. And so, in that unassuming room with its nostalgic charm and delicate artistry, Marathon Whitlock's meticulously ordered life began to tremble with the possibility of unexpected love, an uncharted territory where a simple mistake at a resort door could transform everything. Marathon stood rooted in the doorway for a long, suspended moment, his heart pounding in his ears as he absorbed the surreal tableau before him. The soft hum of the vintage record player and the gentle scratch of the artist's brush filled the silence, each sound amplifying his overwhelming mix of shock, regret, and unexpected intrigue. With every passing second, he felt the weight of his error, and an unfamiliar longing, press against his carefully maintained composure. Finally, swallowing hard, he cleared his throat and spoke, his voice unsteady yet sincere. I'm terribly sorry," he began, stepping back slightly as if to give her space, his eyes locked on hers in a silent plea for forgiveness. "I thought this was my room. I truly apologize for the intrusion." His words, though halting and imperfect, carried an earnestness that seemed to momentarily bridge the gap between two very different worlds. The woman paused, lowering her paintbrush slowly. Her eyes, a soft shade of hazel flecked with gold, shimmered with a mix of surprise and understanding. "It happens," she replied in a calm, almost musical tone, her voice resonating with an unexpected warmth. "Please, don't worry about it." There was no anger in her expression, only a gentle curiosity that invited him to step further into the room rather than retreating from it. For a heartbeat, Marathon hesitated in the threshold, the polished marble floor and the antique furnishings around him now serving as silent witnesses to the raw humanity unfolding before him. Slowly, he crossed the room, each step measured and tentative, until he stood at a respectful distance before her. "I'm Marathon Whitlock," he offered softly, as though introducing a part of himself he rarely revealed. I don't usually make such mistakes, but tonight, I'm very sorry." The woman regarded him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. Then, with a delicate nod, she said, "I'm Celeste Ravenwood." Her tone was gentle yet firm, and as she spoke, it was clear that while the incident was unexpected, she was not unkind. "Sometimes the wrong door opens at just the right moment," she added, her words laced with a quiet humor that made Marathon's chest tighten with a mixture of relief and wonder. They stood there in an almost palpable stillness, the charged silence filled with unspoken possibilities. Marathon's mind raced with questions he scarcely dared to voice, questions about fate, about chance, and about the stirring emotions that he had long kept buried under the cold veneer of corporate ambition. Celeste, meanwhile, studied him with an intensity that belied her calm exterior, as if trying to understand the layers of a man who lived a life so far removed from her own. Encouraged by her openness, Marathon ventured, "I'm not sure what compelled me to come in, or perhaps what compelled you to stay, but I feel, strangely, I feel that this moment is no accident." His admission was raw, vulnerable, a stark contrast to the impenetrable persona he usually exhibited in boardrooms and negotiations. Celeste smiled faintly, setting her brush aside and stepping away from the easel. "Life sometimes takes unexpected turns," she said softly, "and sometimes those turns lead us to discover things we didn't even know we were missing." Her eyes held a subtle invitation, a promise of further conversation beyond this initial apology. As they began to talk, first about the perplexing nature of the night's mix-up, then gradually drifting toward their personal dreams and burdens, Marathon felt a delicate shift within him. The rigid lines of his meticulously ordered existence seemed to blur as he listened to Celeste recount her passion for art, her quiet struggles, and her desire to capture the transient beauty of life on canvas. In turn, he shared bits of his own story, of long nights in endless meetings, of a relentless pursuit of success that had often left him feeling profoundly alone. In that softly lit room, far removed from the sterile corridors of his corporate world, an unexpected connection blossomed. The mistaken door had opened more than a room, it had opened a pathway to vulnerability and possibility. Though the night had begun with an error, it was now transforming into a moment of serendipitous revelation, a moment that hinted at the profound, uncharted territory of genuine human connection. Over the next few days, the accidental encounter that had upended Marathon's meticulously controlled world began to echo in every corner of his mind. Despite his demanding schedule and the relentless barrage of corporate meetings, he found himself unconsciously drawn back to the quiet sanctuary of Celeste's presence. At first, their interactions were sparse, a fleeting nod in the resort's lush garden, a polite exchange by the poolside during breakfast, or a casual smile shared as they passed each other in the sunlit corridors. Yet each encounter carried an undercurrent of unspoken understanding, as though the universe itself had conspired to nudge them together. Marathon's days, usually consumed by rigid financial forecasts and high-stakes negotiations, now held unexpected moments of reflection when he recalled the softness in Celeste's eyes and the warmth of her gentle laughter. The contrast between the sterile precision of boardroom battles and the vibrant, unfiltered passion of her artistic world was stark, and it unsettled him in a way he could neither predict nor ignore. One particularly cool afternoon, as the resort's gardens blushed with the deep greens and vibrant blooms of early spring, Marathon deliberately sought out the spot where Celeste often retreated to paint. He strolled along a winding path lined with ancient oak trees and clusters of brightly colored azaleas, the air perfumed with their delicate fragrance. There, by a small koi pond that shimmered with the reflections of drifting clouds, he found her seated on a weathered stone bench, a sketchpad balanced on her knees and a set of charcoal pencils scattered beside her. The sight of her, so absorbed in the act of creation, stirred something inside him, a mix of admiration and an aching curiosity that seemed to whisper of unexplored depths. With hesitant steps, he approached, careful not to disturb the quiet reverie that enveloped her. For a long while, she did not look up, lost in the meditative process of translating the shifting light and natural beauty onto paper. Finally, as if sensing his presence, Celeste glanced up and their eyes met once more. This time, there was no startled alarm, only a soft, welcoming smile that made the air between them feel charged with promise. They sat together in companionable silence as the gentle murmur of water from the koi pond and the rustle of leaves overhead filled the space. Marathon found himself sharing small details about his day, how the pressures of the corporate world had weighed on him, how even the slightest distraction could derail his focus, and in return, Celeste spoke of her own struggles. She described the battles she fought with self-doubt as she attempted to capture the fleeting essence of nature in her art, and how the solitude of creative pursuit sometimes left her feeling isolated. In that open exchange, the rigid barriers that had defined their disparate lives began to dissolve. Marathon was no longer the imperious CEO for a few precious hours, he was simply a man who found solace in the unadorned truth of another's vulnerability. Celeste, in turn, revealed that beneath her serene exterior lay a restless spirit yearning for connection, a connection that her art, for all its beauty, could never fully provide. Their conversation meandered from the trivial to the profound, touching on topics as varied as childhood memories of laughter and loss, the silent language of colors and emotions, and the relentless pursuit of a life that felt authentically lived. Marathon confessed that, despite his vast wealth and towering achievements, he often felt like an island amid a stormy sea, yearning for a genuine bond that transcended the superficial trappings of power. Celeste's eyes softened as she listened, and she admitted that the world of art, for all its vibrancy, had sometimes left her adrift in solitude. In that shared moment of honesty, they discovered that the spark of connection they felt was more than a fleeting coincidence, it was an awakening of something real and unanticipated. As the afternoon gave way to twilight, the light in the garden shifted to a delicate, golden hue, and the two found themselves reluctant to part. Marathon suggested they take a slow walk along the edge of the resort, where manicured lawns met the rugged beauty of the distant coastline. They strolled side by side, their pace unhurried, as if time itself had slowed to allow their conversation to deepen. The talk turned to dreams and the possibility of rediscovering a life beyond the confines of duty and expectation. Celeste spoke of an art exhibition she had once envisioned, a collection that would celebrate the raw, untamed aspects of nature and the human heart. Marathon, for his part, mused about the chance to build something lasting, something that balanced the cold efficiency of business with the unpredictable magic of life. In the soft glow of the descending sun, their words wove a tapestry of hope, vulnerability, and a promise of possibilities they had never dared to consider before. By the time they returned to the resort, the stars had begun to prick the deepening night sky. Although the inevitable responsibilities of their separate worlds loomed large, Marathon's board meetings and Celeste's artistic commitments, their encounter had irrevocably altered something inside each of them. They had glimpsed a future that defied the rigid labels of corporate titan and romantic artist, a future where genuine human connection could emerge from the most unexpected of circumstances. As they reluctantly said their goodbyes that evening, with promises to meet again soon, both carried with them a quiet certainty: the accidental crossing of their paths was not a mere mistake, but a serendipitous opening to a life that might be filled with more than just business and art. It might be filled with love. Marathon couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the night he'd mistakenly entered Celeste's room was no mere accident. In the days that followed, the pristine corridors of Palm Crest Resort seemed to whisper secrets he wasn't meant to hear. Late one afternoon, while pacing the resort's quiet library, a space he'd rarely visited since arriving, he overheard a hushed conversation between two hotel staff members. Their voices, low and urgent, mentioned a malfunction in the surveillance system along the corridor where he'd made his fateful turn. One of them suggested that the cameras had been deliberately tampered with, as if someone wanted that moment to go unseen by prying eyes. Intrigued and disturbed, Marathon returned to his suite that evening with a heavy heart and a mind determined to uncover the truth. He spent hours poring over the resort's public records on his secure tablet, cross-referencing check-in logs and incident reports. Every detail of his routine was documented meticulously, except for that one corridor where the footage was inexplicably blank. The more he investigated, the more he suspected that someone had orchestrated that encounter. The thought sent a chill down his spine. After all, a man of his stature was rarely manipulated so brazenly. That night, as the resort settled into a deep, quiet slumber, Marathon summoned the courage to contact Celeste. He arranged to meet her in the resort's quietest spot, a secluded terrace overlooking a moonlit garden. The terrace, bordered by tall hedges and softly lit by vintage lanterns, was almost otherworldly in its stillness. When Celeste arrived, her expression was guarded, her eyes flickering with the same uncertainty that haunted him. They sat side by side on a stone bench, the silence between them laden with unspoken questions. Marathon broke the stillness. "Celeste, I need to ask you something," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the gently rippling fountain before them. "Do you remember anything unusual about the night we met?" Celeste hesitated, her fingers tracing the worn surface of the bench. "I remember feeling disoriented," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember the glow of the lamp, and I remember being lost in my painting, then a sudden intrusion. I was startled, yes, but nothing more than that. I didn't feel threatened, just confused." Marathon nodded slowly. "I've been reviewing what little information I could gather from the resort records, and there's something odd. The security footage along that corridor was completely erased, as if someone deliberately wiped it clean. I've never encountered a malfunction like that in all my years. It feels orchestrated." Celeste's eyes widened, and she leaned in closer. "Orchestrated? You mean someone wanted us to meet?" she asked, a mixture of disbelief and curiosity in her tone. He sighed, rubbing his temple as he tried to reconcile the implications. "I don't know yet, but there are whispers among the staff, people saying that the cameras were intentionally disabled. It might be nothing, or it might be a clue that this was planned. I can't shake the feeling that we were set up to be in that room at that moment." For a long while, they sat in the quiet, the only sound the gentle burble of the fountain and the soft rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. Celeste's mind churned with the possibility that her life, which she had always believed was dictated solely by her art, might have been subtly manipulated. "Do you think someone is trying to hurt you?" she asked, the question trembling on her lips. "Or maybe someone with a grudge?" Marathon shook his head slowly. I've always known that in the cutthroat world of high finance, there are competitors who would go to great lengths to destabilize you. But this feels personal. I haven't seen any concrete evidence yet, but it could be someone from my inner circle, or a rival who wants to tarnish my reputation by linking me to an innocent artist. And if that's the case, they're using our accidental encounter as a pawn in a much larger game. Celeste wrapped her arms around herself, a shiver passing through her. I never imagined that a simple mistake could lead to this kind of uncertainty, she murmured. I came here to find inspiration, to let my creativity flow without constraints. Now, I wonder if every brushstroke I make might be part of someone else's plan. Marathon reached out, his hand hovering close to hers, then gently placing it on the back of her arm. Celeste, I don't want to believe that our meeting was anything less than fate. But I also can't ignore the possibility that we were both unwittingly caught in a scheme designed to distract or disgrace me. His eyes, usually so unyielding, held a glimmer of vulnerability that startled him. All I know is that I want to protect you, and myself, from whatever forces are at work here. Celeste met his gaze steadily. Then we must find out who's behind this. If someone has orchestrated our meeting, we owe it to ourselves to uncover their motives. Not just for our sake, but to preserve the integrity of our work and our lives. Their conversation, which began in cautious whispers, grew more urgent as the night deepened. They exchanged details of their recent days, Marathon's incessant inquiries with security, Celeste's recollections of hazy moments that felt disjointed from her usual clarity. In that intimate space on the moonlit terrace, the air heavy with both trepidation and a budding sense of partnership, they resolved to work together to expose the truth. As they parted that night, a fragile pact had formed between them, a promise to confront the shadowy forces that had interjected themselves into their lives. While neither knew exactly who might be responsible, a rival executive, a betrayed associate, or a more elusive figure lurking in the corporate underworld, they both sensed that the repercussions of this mystery could be far-reaching. In the quiet darkness, under the watchful eyes of distant stars, Marathon and Celeste embraced the uncertain promise of tomorrow, determined that, together, they would untangle the web of deception and reclaim the sanctity of their chosen paths. Marathon returned to his suite that night with a storm of questions raging in his mind. The mystery behind that fateful mistaken door, and the deliberate tampering of surveillance footage, had grown impossible to ignore. In the following days, he and Celeste began to work together to unravel the threads of the conspiracy that had inexplicably brought them together. Their private discussions turned into lengthy strategy sessions held in the resort's discreet study room, a quiet haven lined with dark wood bookshelves and softly glowing lamps, far from the prying eyes of the public spaces. One evening, after a long day of covert meetings and whispered exchanges with trusted staff members, Marathon and Celeste sat across from each other at a small, round table in the study. Rain pattered gently against the window, lending a steady, rhythmic soundtrack to their conversation. Marathon spread out a collection of printed emails, flight records, and hotel check-in logs across the table. The documents were the fruit of several days of meticulous investigation conducted by his private security team and a few contacts within the resort. Celeste, her eyes bright with a mix of determination and apprehension, carefully examined each piece of evidence. "It appears," Marathon said slowly, tapping a page with a gloved finger, "that the corridor's surveillance was deliberately wiped clean on the night we met. There's no record of our presence there, except for this gap in the logs. And look at these timestamps," he continued, sliding a printout across the table. "They indicate that someone coordinated our passage through that area with astonishing precision. It's as if our meeting was scheduled." Celeste frowned as she studied the documents. Scheduled? But why? Who would benefit from forcing our paths to cross, she murmured. She paused, her gaze drifting to a set of encrypted emails printed on yellowed paper. "I found several messages that reference an intermediary operating under the name Raina Gray. It seems that this person was in charge of coordinating unusual bookings and even manipulated a few hotel records. The emails are terse but chilling, instructions, confirmation of details, even a directive to ensure the meeting goes smoothly. Marathon leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his dark hair. I've always had rivals in the boardroom, but this is different. The precision here suggests a long-term plan, one that might have been aimed at distracting me from an upcoming merger, or perhaps destabilizing my reputation altogether. And if Raina Gray is behind this, then it isn't just a random hoax. It's a full-scale operation. He looked up, his eyes dark and serious. There's one more piece of evidence. My investigators recovered partial credit card records that point to a rental car used on the night in question. The vehicle was registered to someone named Freya Landon. That name appears in several financial transactions related to high-end wedding supplies, even down to the intricate lace on invitation cards and floral arrangements. It seems that not only was our meeting engineered, but every detail, from our accidental encounter to the very signatures on the marriage certificate, was orchestrated to appear completely legitimate. Celeste reached out, touching his hand lightly. This is more than just a personal prank or a harmless mistake, isn't it? Someone wanted to manipulate both our lives. And I can't help but wonder, why me? Why target a struggling artist like myself to be part of this elaborate scheme? Her voice trembled with both indignation and curiosity. You're a titan of industry. I always thought your battles were fought in boardrooms and through high-stakes deals. Now, you're facing a mystery that threatens not just your business, but our very identities. Marathon's expression softened as he considered her words. I've built my empire on certainty and control, but lately, I've come to learn that not every variable can be mastered. Perhaps, inadvertently, fate, or someone with a dark agenda, saw a chance to bind two very different worlds together. I suspect that this conspiracy might have been designed to distract me from critical corporate maneuvers, or even to embarrass me publicly. In any case, it has forced me to confront parts of myself I'd long kept buried, the need for genuine connection, for someone who understands the weight of responsibility and the loneliness that accompanies it. He paused, his gaze lingering on the scattered papers. The more I dig, the more I realize that the orchestrator might have underestimated us. They assumed that if we were forced together, we'd simply sign away our futures in shame. But standing here with you, I feel that we have a choice, a chance to rewrite our narrative, to expose the deceit and perhaps even turn this curse into a catalyst for something better. Celeste's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she squeezed his hand. I never imagined that an accidental mistake could lead to something so profound, she whispered. I've always believed that art was about truth, capturing the essence of life, no matter how messy it is. And now, it seems, life itself has painted a picture for us, a canvas filled with both chaos and unexpected beauty. They sat in silence for a few long minutes, the gravity of their shared realization settling between them. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the world clean in a quiet, relentless rhythm. Finally, Marathon spoke again, his voice resolute. We must expose this conspiracy, Celeste. Not just for my sake, or even yours, but to ensure that no one else is manipulated in this manner. I'll instruct my legal team to compile every scrap of evidence we have and present it to the authorities. But I also want you to know that I'm in this with you, whatever that may mean for us moving forward. Celeste nodded, her face a mixture of determination and vulnerability. I'll do whatever it takes, she said. I want to reclaim my own story. And if, through all of this, we discover that our paths were forced together by deceit, then at least we'll know the truth. But if we find that there's something real between us, something worth holding on to, then perhaps this forced union was not a curse after all. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange lay a promise that, regardless of the outcome, they would face the dark forces orchestrating this elaborate scheme together. As the storm outside subsided into a gentle drizzle, Marathon and Celeste gathered their documents and resolved to set their plan in motion. They would expose the mastermind behind the manipulation, unmask Raina Gray and Freya Landon, and force Brandon Keyes into the light. And in doing so, they hoped to reclaim not only their reputations but also their freedom to choose their own destinies. In that small, quiet study room, amidst the clamor of thunder and the soft glow of evening, two very different souls forged an alliance. Their shared quest for truth had become something more, a fragile, yet undeniable bond, built on mutual trust, shared vulnerability, and a newfound hope that even the darkest conspiracies could lead to the most unexpected revelations of love. Marathon sat alone in his dimly lit study that evening, the storm outside pounding relentlessly against the tall windows as if trying to force secrets out into the open. The room, filled with dark wood paneling, an overstuffed leather sofa, and a scattering of case files and digital tablets, bore witness to his inner turmoil. Every document spread before him, encrypted emails, financial records, and testimonies from his investigators, seemed to confirm one chilling possibility: his bitter rival, Brandon Keyes, was orchestrating a sophisticated plot to undermine his empire. The evidence pointed not only to an elaborate scheme that involved falsified hotel records and manipulated surveillance footage, but also to a deliberate effort to force him into a contrived marriage with Celeste Ravenwood, a union that was as perplexing as it was damaging. Marathon's mind raced as he reviewed the latest report. His trusted investigator had just uncovered a series of emails exchanged between Keyes and an intermediary known only as Raina Gray. In these messages, Keyes discussed using a professional forger, someone who specialized in creating legal documents that could pass even the strictest scrutiny, to fabricate a marriage certificate linking him with an unsuspecting artist. The plan was cunning. By thrusting a scandalous, unexpected personal connection into his life, Keyes aimed to distract shareholders, damage his reputation, and ultimately force him into a precarious bargaining position. The thought of being manipulated in such an intimate manner filled him with a mix of rage and sorrow. How could someone be so callous as to toy with not only his public persona but also the fragile human connections he had begun to cherish? Unable to keep his anguish to himself, he picked up the phone and dialed Celeste's number. Her voice, soft and measured, answered after a few rings. "Celeste, it's me. I need to talk, now," he said, his tone tight with urgency. They agreed to meet immediately in the private lounge of his suite, a secluded space away from the prying eyes of the resort's public areas. In that quiet room, illuminated only by the soft glow of a single table lamp, Marathon laid out the evidence on the polished oak table. He explained every detail: the corrupted surveillance footage in the corridor, the chain of emails implicating Keyes, and the suspicious financial transactions linked to an alias, Freya Landon. Celeste listened intently, her hazel eyes narrowing as she absorbed each piece of the puzzle. "So they engineered our meeting," she whispered, her voice trembling between disbelief and indignation. "They made it so that we'd be forced together as a distraction, to humiliate you and perhaps even me." Marathon nodded slowly, the weight of his voice heavy with emotion. "Yes. I've built my life on certainty and control, yet here I am, entangled in a sham that was designed to destabilize everything I've worked for. And the worst part is, this isn't just about me. It's about the integrity of our work, your art, our charity, everything." He paused, running a hand over his stubbled chin. "I want to expose Keyes for what he is, a man who would stoop to manipulate lives for his own gain. But I can't do it alone. I need you with me, Celeste. I need someone who sees the world with honest eyes, not the calculated gaze of a boardroom warrior." Celeste's voice softened as she reached across the table and gently grasped his hand. "Marathon, I've always believed that art and truth are intertwined. If someone has tried to force a narrative upon us, then we must rewrite that narrative with our own truth. I want to help you expose this corruption, to reclaim not only your reputation but also the sanctity of our connection, even if it was born from a grand deception." Her words, tender yet resolute, sent a surge of determination through him. They spent hours strategizing, pooling together every scrap of evidence they could muster. Marathon's legal team had confirmed that the forged marriage certificate was fully registered with the county clerk, a bureaucratic nightmare that Keyes had anticipated in his scheme. Celeste contributed her own observations, vivid recollections of that fateful night, moments of disorientation and flashes of clarity that suggested something in her memory had been suppressed or altered. Together, they hypothesized that the orchestrator, likely acting under Key's orders, had used a combination of sedatives and psychological manipulation to erase critical details from both their minds. The calculated plan was to force them into a legally binding union that would later serve as the basis for public humiliation and corporate blackmail. As the storm raged on outside, the two forged a plan of action. They agreed to contact an independent forensic expert specializing in document authentication and memory retrieval, a specialist whose unconventional methods had, on rare occasions, helped people recover lost fragments of their past. Marathon would also escalate his internal investigation, discreetly mobilizing his security team to track any further digital or financial trails that might lead directly to Keys. "We have to act swiftly," he murmured, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "The longer this drags on, the more damage it could do, not just to me, but to every facet of our lives. I can't stand by and let someone else dictate our story." Celeste squeezed his hand in silent agreement. "We will face this together. I'm not going to let my art, or my life, be used as a pawn in someone else's game. Let's expose them, one piece of evidence at a time." Her voice was resolute, steady, carrying the quiet strength of someone who had faced her own share of hardships and come out the other side with an unyielding spirit. Their conversation, punctuated by the rhythmic patter of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder, stretched late into the night. Each new piece of evidence they discussed, each email header, every bank statement detail, and the potential eyewitness accounts from hotel staff, wove a tapestry of deceit that was as intricate as it was abhorrent. Yet, with every revelation, the connection between Marathon and Celeste grew stronger, tempered by mutual respect and the shared burden of an injustice that was as personal as it was corporate. By the time they finally parted ways, the first light of dawn was beginning to seep through the curtains. They agreed to reconvene the next day, both promising to update each other as soon as any new information emerged. As Marathon stepped out into the pale morning air, he felt a mix of resolve and trepidation. The battle to reclaim control over his life and protect Celeste was just beginning, and although the road ahead promised to be fraught with peril, he could not help but feel that together, they were more powerful than any conspirator. And so, in that quiet, rain-washed moment of shared purpose, the seeds of a deeper alliance were sown, a determination to fight back against those who sought to manipulate their fates and, in the process, to rediscover the authentic connection that had blossomed unexpectedly between a hardened billionaire and a passionate artist. Marathon awoke to a day that crackled with tension, as if the very air in the resort had shifted in anticipation of what was to come. The investigation had reached a fever pitch overnight, and now every conversation, every whispered word among the staff, felt laden with secrets waiting to be unraveled. With a determined resolve, he summoned his inner circle, his most trusted security experts, legal advisors, and a few discreet investigators who had worked tirelessly to piece together the clues that had led them so far. The breakthrough came in the form of a single, damning email recovered from an obscure server. In it, a shadowy intermediary under the alias Raina Gray had explicitly referenced a plan to stage a fraudulent marriage, complete with forged documents and manipulated hotel records. The email was brief yet chilling, its tone clinical, as though the orchestrator were cataloging a routine transaction. More shockingly, further analysis revealed that several bank transfers had been routed through shell companies linked to Brandon Keyes, a rival executive with a notorious reputation for underhanded tactics. That morning, Marathon convened an emergency meeting in a secure, windowless conference room deep within the resort's private offices. The heavy, oak table was strewn with printed emails, financial statements, and photographic evidence of tampered security logs. His team worked in hushed urgency, each member aware that the slightest leak could ignite a scandal that might not only cripple his empire but also shatter the fragile alliance that had grown between him and Celeste. As the clock ticked inexorably, Marathon's gaze fell upon a particularly incriminating attachment, a scanned document bearing the unmistakable signature of the intermediary, which outlined the precise logistics of the entire scheme. His voice, usually so measured and controlled, cracked as he addressed his team, we now have proof that this entire incident wasn't a random mistake. It was a calculated maneuver designed to force a union that could be exploited to undermine my position. Brandon Keyes is at the center of this, and we must expose him before he can strike again. Later that afternoon, while Marathon coordinated with his legal team to prepare a statement for the district attorney, Celeste received a call from one of her contacts in the local art community. A former assistant of a rival gallery had come forward with information suggesting that the mysterious Raina Gray had been seen meeting with individuals connected to Brandon Keyes in a seedy part of the city, a far cry from the polished world of corporate boardrooms. The revelation sent a jolt through Celeste, and she hurried to meet Marathon in a quiet corner of the resort's executive lounge. There, amidst the subdued glow of designer lamps and the soft murmur of restrained conversation, they compared notes. Celeste's voice trembled as she recounted the details. I learned that Raina isn't just a name, it's a carefully constructed persona. Her real identity has been concealed by layers of forged documents and fake profiles. Apparently, she was hired to orchestrate every detail of our supposed wedding, down to the floral arrangements and even the erroneous entry in the county clerk's office. Marathon's eyes darkened as he absorbed her words. It appears Keyes wanted to embarrass me on a personal level, make it look like I was distracted by a sham union. He thought that by creating a scandal, he could force the board to question my leadership. But we now have enough evidence to turn the tables. His tone was resolute, edged with a fierce determination that both humbled and inspired Celeste. In the following hours, they set their plan into motion. Marathon arranged a confidential meeting with the district attorney, presenting every shred of evidence they had collected. At the same time, Celeste reached out to trusted friends in the art community to gather any additional testimonies regarding the orchestrator's methods. The collaboration between the two of them, once only connected by a fateful mistake, now deepened into an alliance forged in adversity. As dusk fell over the resort, the atmosphere in the conference room was electric. Marathon's legal team, bolstered by the irrefutable documentation of Keyes' involvement, prepared to make the case public. Every detail, from the corrupted surveillance footage to the fabricated hotel check-in records, was laid bare in a meticulous report that painted a picture of deception, manipulation, and a rival's vindictive ambition. Marathon and Celeste then attended a prearranged press conference held in a discreet media room adjacent to the resort's grand ballroom. The room buzzed with tension as reporters gathered, cameras rolling and microphones thrust forward, hungry for the latest scandal. Marathon stepped up to the podium with a calm that belied the turmoil raging within him. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady, I come before you not only to address a matter of corporate integrity but also to expose an elaborate attempt to tarnish my name through personal deception. As he spoke, Celeste stood quietly to his side, her presence lending him an unexpected strength. He detailed the orchestrated nature of the fraudulent marriage, how a rival, Brandon Keyes, had set in motion a plan to force a union designed to distract and discredit him. The evidence, he declared, was undeniable. A series of gasps and murmurs filled the room as the gravity of his words sank in. Among the flashing cameras and probing questions, one reporter dared to ask, Mr. Whitlock, do you believe this incident was an isolated event, or is it part of a broader strategy against you? Marathon's gaze swept over the assembled press, his eyes finally settling on Celeste. I believe, he said firmly, that the truth is often hidden beneath layers of deceit. Today, we are lifting that veil not only to protect my company but to ensure that no one's life is manipulated for someone else's gain. His words resonated, and the room erupted in a mix of stunned silence and fervent applause. In that charged moment, as Marathon and Celeste exchanged a look that held both sorrow and a spark of something like hope, the full extent of the conspiracy was laid bare. The master plan, crafted with chilling precision, was now exposed to the public, and its architect, Brandon Keyes, would soon face the full force of the law. Yet even as Marathon declared his intent to pursue legal action, the connection between him and Celeste had deepened beyond the confines of a corporate vendetta. Their shared resolve had transformed their accidental bond into something far more significant, a testament to the unexpected ways in which adversity can forge lasting alliances. As the press conference drew to a close and the media began to disperse, Marathon stepped down from the podium, his eyes still locked with Celeste's. In that fleeting moment, amid the clamor of cameras and the murmur of the press, they both understood that their journey was only just beginning. They had unmasked the shadows behind the deception, but in doing so, they had also discovered in each other a kindred spirit, a promise that, no matter how convoluted the path, the truth would set them free. And as the first rays of dawn began to light the horizon, they parted with a quiet, unspoken vow to face whatever came next together. Marathon awoke on the morning of the gala with a sense of resolute anticipation, as if the very air around him vibrated with the promise of new beginnings. The previous day's press conference had rattled the corporate world and exposed Brandon Key's nefarious plot, but it had also left a lingering warmth in his heart, a warmth that had grown steadily through long nights spent poring over evidence with Celeste. Now, on this pivotal Valentine's Day evening, he felt as though all the pieces of a convoluted puzzle were finally coming together, offering him not only vindication but also the possibility of a future that defied the cold logic of business and rivalry. That night, the grand ballroom of the Palm Crest Resort shimmered under cascades of soft rose and gold light. Guests in elegant attire mingled amid tables adorned with fragrant bouquets and flickering candles, the air alive with anticipation and whispered conversations. Yet behind the glittering facade, Marathon's thoughts were singularly focused on the woman who had transformed his world, a woman whose kindness and vulnerability had become the axis around which his new reality turned. As he made his entrance, his stride measured and confident, his eyes scanned the room until they found Celeste standing near a carved marble column, her gaze both hopeful and resolute. The memory of their quiet, rain-soaked conversation on the secluded terrace came flooding back, a tender echo of that stormy night when they had vowed to unmask the conspiracy and reclaim their lives. The gala was meant to be a celebration of charitable endeavors and corporate responsibility, yet for Marathon it had evolved into a personal declaration of transformation. As he approached the podium, the murmurs of the assembled elite faded into a hush. With a steady, measured tone, he began to speak, recounting not only the dark undercurrents that had threatened his empire but also the unexpected journey that had led him to a profound truth about love. Tonight, I stand before you, not merely as a CEO defending the honor of my company, he declared, his voice resonant and clear, but as a man who has discovered that even in the midst of calculated deception and bitter rivalry, genuine connection can flourish. His words, laced with sincerity and a hint of vulnerability, sent a ripple of stunned silence through the crowd. As Marathon continued, he recounted in carefully chosen phrases how an orchestrated scandal, a forced union meant to undermine him, had instead opened his eyes to a life he never knew he craved. Every detail was laid out, the inexplicable tampering with security footage, the intercepted emails implicating a rival, and the painstaking investigations that had ultimately led to the unmasking of a plot designed to embarrass him. But the most powerful moment came when he spoke of Celeste. In the darkest hours, when I believed I was alone against the tide of treachery, I found in Celeste not just a partner in uncovering the truth, but a beacon of hope, a reminder that love, in its most unexpected form, can be a source of strength and redemption. His eyes, once as hard as forged steel, softened as they met Celeste's across the room. The applause that followed was not just for the revelation of corporate malfeasance, but for the unmistakable humanity in his confession. As the murmurs of approval spread throughout the ballroom, Celeste stepped forward, her elegant gown catching the light, her expression radiant with a mix of determination and gentle joy. In that moment, the two of them, once strangers brought together by a mistaken door, became inseparable, their fates forever intertwined by circumstance and by the courage to embrace the unexpected. After the formal program, the gala transformed into a celebration of new beginnings. Marathon and Celeste moved together through the throng of guests, each step measured and full of quiet understanding. In the soft glow of a private dance floor set aside for a slow waltz, they shared a dance that was both tender and transformative. The rhythm of the music, slow and unhurried, seemed to echo the steady beat of their hearts as they leaned into each other, their bodies and souls aligned in that rare, perfect moment of vulnerability. In whispered conversation between dances, they promised to work together to ensure that the forces that had once manipulated their lives would never again dictate their future. They spoke of legal resolutions that would nullify the fraudulent marriage certificate without tarnishing their newfound bond, of rebuilding reputations, and of the possibility that, despite the chaos, this accidental union might blossom into something lasting and true. As the night deepened, the champagne flowed and the celebrations reached a fevered pitch, yet Marathon and Celeste retreated to a quiet balcony overlooking the illuminated resort grounds. Here, under a tapestry of stars and the gentle hum of midnight, they allowed themselves to dream aloud. Marathon confessed that for the first time in his life he felt the stirrings of genuine contentment, a peace that transcended the endless pursuit of profit and power. Celeste, with tears glistening in her eyes, admitted that her art had always been her escape, but now she saw in their shared struggle the raw inspiration for a new chapter of creativity and hope. They made plans not just for legal resolutions, but for personal ones, secret outings, private moments away from the scrutinizing eyes of both the corporate world and the art scene, and a tentative promise to explore a relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. In the final moments of the evening, as the gala wound down and the last echoes of music drifted away, Marathon and Celeste stood side by side on the balcony, hands intertwined. The cool night air brushed against their faces, carrying with it the sense of salt from the sea and the lingering fragrance of roses from the ballroom. It was here, in this quiet, transcendent space between the clamor of public celebration and the solitude of their private hearts, that they found their truth. The forced marriage, once a tool of corporate sabotage, had been transformed into a symbol of defiance against the forces that sought to control them. Marathon whispered, "I never expected to find this, true, unexpected love, in the midst of all this chaos." Celeste leaned her head on his shoulder and replied softly, "Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways, and the wrong door opens to the right room." Their voices mingled with the soft rustling of the night, a promise of tomorrow filled with hope, resilience, and the courage to embrace a future that neither had dared to imagine before that fateful, mistaken entrance. And as they stood together, enveloped by the gentle promise of the coming dawn, it was clear that their journey, though born of deception and misfortune, had led them to a place where love, against all odds, had triumphed.